Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today, we're doing something very similar to what we did last time, except this time, instead of giving an analysis of just our own team, we'll be giving an analysis of every team in Season 2 of the league. It's probably going to be a longer one, so strap in. But I just want to give like a rundown of all the different teams and give all my thoughts and everything, and sort them all through this tier list. Now, before we get started, I want to give you guys like a rundown, right, of what I'm planning on looking at in terms of rankings and stuff. So, first of all, I want to see the obvious, which is how good are the Pokemon? Were they able to, use their lower tier picks to get something good, like a sleeper pick, or did they just get something that is in that tier for a reason? I'm also looking at chemistry. How well do the mons that they have work with each other? Do they have conflicting speed tiers, or do they have like uses that don't mesh well together? Do they not support each other very well? All that business. I'm also looking for versatility. If the team is dead set locked into just one thing, just one mode, then it's a lot easier to predict and play around, which makes it not quite as strong because, if I know you're going to bring a Trick Room team, then there are things that I can do about that. I can bring a Trick Room user myself, I can bring Imprison, I can bring Taunt, that kind of stuff. So those are the three major criteria. As we go along, there might be some other things that we take into account, but those are the big ones, right? So for something to be an S tier, it has to have good mons, good chemistry, and a lot of stuff that it can do. In D tier, bad mons, no chemistry, very one way. I don't expect to be putting a lot of things into D tier, but we'll see. So right off the bat, terrible draft. Garbage. I don't know who drafted this team, but whoever it is an idiot. So, with that out of the way, we are starting off with the Alexandria Arcanines, coached by Dan the Man, or just Dan. His stuff will be linked in the description, so go check him out. Great guy. So, as you can see looking down the draft, he has Gmax Venusaur, Glastrier, Tapu Koko, Torkoal, Bronzong, Gudra, Mantine, Tangela, Beheeyem, Frosmoth, and Thievul. Now, right off the bat, this team has a really strong Trick Room mode, right? You have Bronzong, which does really well, Glastrier, which is crazy good, and then Beheeyem, especially, I think is a sleeper pick, especially in Trick Room, and then Frosmoth will do well. Thievul isn't the worst thing. And then it has a decent out of Trick Room mode. You have Torkoal Venusaur, which is a really strong pairing, super strong combination. Very good of him to pick that up. You have Tapu Koko. And then you have a few picks that don't really fit into either. I don't know what he plans on doing with Thievul, but it's not good. Maybe it was something he got stuck with. I don't know. Tangela, not fantastic. It's not the worst thing in the world. Don't get me wrong. Sleep Powder is always very strong, and it gets Rage Powder, and redirection is super important. But because it's so slow, and if you use knockoff on it, it loses that Eviolite, and then all of a sudden it's significantly less bulky. It kind of has All My Friends Are Dead syndrome, to steal a phrase from Wolf Glick, where you kind of just kill whatever's next to it, and then you're in the clear. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I don't know. I think it's a weird pick, but I certainly have weird picks. Mantine is a sleeper pick for sure. It doesn't necessarily thrive in, of, or out of Trick Room, but its special defense is very bulky. It gets Tailwind, which is super useful. I think it gets Follow Me, but I could be wrong. And again, very bulky. It gets Scald, so you can fish for burns, pun intended. So that's some stuff. Gudra is pretty versatile. Another bulky pick. However, I don't know. The chemistry is definitely decent. Like, just looking over the team, I think that Torkoal, Venusaur, Coco go very well together, and then Glastrier, Bronzong, Beheeyem, Frostmoth go really well together. But on the other hand, I'm not super sure where Gudra, Mantine, Tangela, and Thievul fit into that. I'm sure there will be uses for them. Bulky water types are good, dragon types are good, dark types are important, and so is grass. But it just, I don't know, it seems a little off. But with that said, if they don't really work out in his favor, it's pretty easy for him to just trade him out for something else. Another issue is that if he plans on bringing Beheeyem to Trick Room mode, that's double Psychic types. And then if he brings Tangela, that team is super weak to, like, knockoff. Or just Dark type moves in general. But with all that said, two really strong modes, good access to speed control with Trick Room and Tailwind. I think a lot of these mons are really strong in their own right, except for Thievul, which is a garbage mon, and it may have been a panic pick. I would love for Dan to prove me wrong. There are certainly plenty of sleeper picks that I like using, but as it stands, I think Thievul is definitely the weakest link. But again, outside of that, good chemistry, good versatility, certainly not flawless, but I do think that it's pretty strong. In terms of, like, type matchups, we have a really convenient chart on this website, which I really, really love. When you're looking over, he doesn't have more than 4 weaknesses to a single type. But even then, the only one where it's like this, his team is really weak to this, is Rock, which is not a super important type. So he's got a lot of good defensive things to work with. Not that many weaknesses to exploit. I think this is a really solid team. I think it has a couple of questionable moments, I guess, as in, like, it has a good core for each of its modes, but then the supporting ones is like, I'm not really sure what he's going to do, and then Thievul sucks, which I've already said. But like I said, outside of that, I think this is a really solid team, and I think Dan is going to be able to pilot it really well. I think this is an A-tier team. Not the strongest, but definitely something to be afraid of in the right hands, and I think Dan is the right hands. I'm excited to see what he does this season. Up next, we have the Clinton Clefables, coached, by Rolo. This is our Week 1 opponent, and this team is interesting for sure. Looking down the list, it has Copperajah, Gmax, Cresselia, Porygon Z, Clefable, Mamoswine, Mandibuzz, Claydol, Quillfish, Vaporeon, Kangaskhan, and Manectric. The first thing that pops out at me is that it's very defensive. Copperajah is very bulky. Cresselia is mostly bulk. Clefable is very bulky. Mandibuzz is bulky. Claydol, Quillfish, Vaporeon. All of those are very, like, defensive, supportive type Pokemon. And it makes me a little worried that the offensive output will be lower than a lot of other teams. However, playing to timer is a win condition that a lot of people don't like, but it's valid, and I think this team is going to have a pretty easy time doing that. But excuse me, even though a lot of those mons are defensive, there are still some really heavy hitters here. Specifically, Caparaja, whose attack is just ridiculous. Porygon Z is a menace. Adaptability plus access to super strong moves plus base 135 special attack is ridiculous. Slap Life Orb on that thing and Dynamax it, it is taking names. Mamoswine is very strong. Kangaskhan can do work. So he has options. However, I also noticed that there's kind of like a few more type repetitions than some other teams might have. He's got 2 defensive psychic types, and he has 2 normal types and 2 water types. And so those repetitions might be relatively easy to exploit. However, because most of them, with the exception of Porygon Z and Kangaskhan, serve the same purpose, so it's unlikely that he would bring both to the same match. However, with that said, there's a lot of utility on this team. Caparaja's G-Max move sets Steel-type Stealth Rock, which is nothing to scoff at. It's certainly not something you want to ignore, considering how good of a type Steel is, especially against Fairies, which is a super strong type. Cresselia gets Trick Room, which is huge. I think this team is going to do really, really well under Trick Room. Clefable gets Screens, it gets Redirection. Mamoswine gets Rocks if he really wants to double up on the entry hazards. Mandibuzz gets Knockoff, Taunt, Roost. Claydol gets Screens in Trick Room. Intimidate on Quillfish. Wish Passing and Heal Bell on Vaporeon. Fake Out with Kangaskhan. There's a lot of stuff that this team can do to really stop momentum. And I think it's something that people really need to be aware of, because if you're not careful, this team will take you to timer. It's very tough to take out, and it's not like you can just set up on it for free. Vaporeon gets Haze, Clefable gets Unaware. There's things that this team can do to stop you if you want to set up. It can heal off damage pretty easily. It can get rid of status effects if you're looking to like burn something, or if you want to beat it at its own game, you won't. It's certainly possible to overpower things in VGC. However, people shouldn't assume that just because offensive capabilities are potentially lesser than most other teams, especially in a format like this, it's not going to be easy to take down. These mons are going to stay alive, which is not, it's the opposite of what you're trying to achieve in a battle. It's certainly not the easiest play style to do in a format like this, but it's possible, and this is a really good team to do it with. I think Rollo's a good coach, and I think that if anyone can pull it off, he can. And speaking of defensive, if we look at the type chart, he is negative in exactly one type. This is going to be a rough team to work around, and if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. Not the strongest team, not the scariest team, but definitely something to be on the lookout for. I think this is a B tier team. I think it's a sleeper pick, if I'm being completely honest with you. Up next, we have the Corpus Christi Krabbies, coached by Krabby Shack. This team comes out swinging. G-Max Duraludon, Dracovish, Heatran, Whimsicott, Gourgeist, Togetic, Hippowdon, Pikachu, Grapploct, Maractus, and Skuntank. Now, when I say this team comes out swinging, it's because when you first start looking at this, it's super scary. Whimsicott, Dracovish, insane. The offensive pressure that Dracovish puts out is basically unmatched. And with Whimsicott next to it, providing an instant double speed boost, it's really scary in any situation. Unless you have like a Storm Drain Pokemon, which most people don't, considering there's only a couple. Gastrodon, which didn't get drafted, and Maractus, which is on this team. And maybe a couple others, but those are the only ones that come to mind. Vicious Rend is going to kill something on your team for sure, unless you are super, super equipped to handle it, which I think a lot of teams are not. That's a super, super scary pairing, and I'm not super psyched to go up against it. However, when you start looking past that, it kind of falls off. I love Gmax Duraludon, but losing the ability to lower their attack is kind of a big deal. Running out of PP is not a very prominent threat in VGC, and so I feel like the secondary effect on that move is not very strong, and so it's like, eh. However, like I said in my analysis video, putting Whimsicott next to Duraludon is super, super scary. Tailwind Fake Tears plus whatever Duraludon has is really all you need, and it's very scary. And so, even though I prefer regular Duraludon to Gmax Duraludon, that's still a very scary pairing. And then you have Heatran, which it's really good in singles, but when I think about it in doubles, it's like, I mean, it gets a good coverage move with, with Heat Wave and Lava Plume, or Eruption, I should say, sorry. But past that, it's, it gets Taunt, I guess. Plus, it's an additional steel type, so already repeating some weaknesses there. And then you start to go down, and it's like Gourgeist is kind of like a very distinct Trick Room Pokemon. And you look at the rest of the team, and it doesn't really have a lot of support for that mode. Plus it's another grass type, and yeah, it's another ghost. It's a ghost type, which is an important type to have, but again, doubling up on some weaknesses. Togetic, like I said about Tangela for the Alexandria Arcanines, Togetic kind of has All My Friends Are Dead syndrome. It's just worse Togekiss. Yes, it gets Follow Me, and yes, it's really bulky because of the Eviolite, but if you can negate that with, like, one Taunt, or any Mon that ignores Redirection, Togetic kind of doesn't do anything. And then it's another fairy type, so again, doubling up on more weaknesses. And then Hippowdon, which is a good sand setter, but it doesn't really have anything on the team to capitalize off of sand. Yes, it gets Yawn, and yes, it gets Stealth Rock, but Stealth Rock isn't very good in VGC. Entry Hazards aren't very prominent, and Yawn is good, but then what does it do? Click Rock Slide? Yeah, Rock Slide is a good move, but there are a lot of better users out there. And then Pikachu. Pikachu is nothing to sneeze at for sure, especially with the Light Ball, giving it a huge boost to both of its attacking stats. But it's Pikachu. it's not great. It's kind of easy to exploit. Grapploct is honestly kind of a sleeper pick in my opinion. I think it would do well under Trick Room. But so far, not a ton of things on this team that are super thriving in Trick Room. Maractus, Storm. It's nice to take Storm Drain off the table for other people, but this is a third grass type. And none of the secondary typings that these grass type have negate any of the weaknesses that they all share. They're all weak to flying, they're all weak to fire. And, I mean, except for Bug, but it's Bug. So, again, aside from taking Storm Drain away from other people. I don't think Maractus does too much. I think it gets Sleep Powder, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure. And then Skuntank gets Sucker Punch. And other than that, it's kind of like, I don't know. The team comes out really strong. A lot of really strong high tier picks. And then when you get to the lower tiers, it's like it really falls off hard. Um I don't see how this team does against a team that's ready for its leads. So if someone brings like Prankster Taunt, like on Lipard, Tailwind goes away, and then Dracovish is a lot easier to deal with. Not the easiest thing to deal with, but it's like it's easy to plan around one specific lead, maybe two because of Duraludon, but then if you take down whatever the lead is, then the team kind of falls apart. There are a couple things that are kind of scary. Again, I think Grapple Locked is better than people give it credit for, and Pikachu has the capabilities of doing decent damage, so does Skuntank and Hippowdon, but nothing on here really screams like good Mon, good sleeper pick, or anything like that. I think Krabby Shack will certainly do fine with it. There are tools here that can be used in the right hands, but I think it's going to be really, really tricky to pull off. I think this is a C tier team. Up next, we have the Dice Roll Drillbers, coached by Ruby. In case you don't know, this team was drafted via random number generator. So if it seems kind of all over the place, that's because it is. So, with that said, let's get into it. Gmax, Grimmsnarl, Dracozolt, Pheromosa, Darmanitan, Gigalith, Dusknoir, Berserker, Pincurchin, Stoutland, Hitmonlee, and Coughing. So the team is definitely kind of weird, but honestly, I think it turned out pretty okay. Grimmsnarl is always a great mon to have. Prankster screens, Fake Out, Yawn, being able to get the Yawn effect from its Gmax move. It puts off decent, pretty good offensive pressure. Sucker Punch it gets. Base 120 attack is really good. So that's a great mon to have. Dracozolt is scary. Hustle, Scarf, Boltbeak is very scary. It's no Vicious Rend, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely something to be afraid of. Pheromosa is just super scary. Base 137 in both attacking stats and 151 speed. Blazing fast. Hits like a truck. Very strong, very scary. Darmanitan, another thing that puts off just so much pressure. Fire type is a really good typing. It gets really good coverage. 140 attack is insane, and 95 speed is not the greatest. It's just under that 100 benchmark, but with a Scarf, that thing is ridiculous. And if it's next to something using like Max Airstream, very scary. Rock Slide is an excellent move to have access to on the right Pokemon, and Darmanitan is one of those. Flare Blitz, it's really hard to bring something in on Darmanitan's Flare Blitz. It's super scary. That mon freaks me out. Gigalith is pretty distinctly just like a sand setter, but here's the thing. I think there are some picks in here that work really well with Gigalith. For example, Dusknoir is here against a team that can't reset the weather. Bringing in Gigalith next to Dusknoir and going for like Choice Band Explosion if you wanted to. Huge damage, doesn't hit your partner. And it gets you off to a really good start, because then you can bring in Stoutland, which a lot of people I think are going to underestimate, because Stoutland 110 attack is really good. 80 speed, again, is not incredible, but it has Sand Rush, which doubles that, which means it's outrunning everything. Everything that's unboosted, I should say. And so that's, I think the sand chemistry here is actually a lot better than I would have expected from a team that didn't draft anything on purpose. I also think Berserker is a huge sleeper pick. Steely Spirit is ridiculous. The It's like a choice band, choice specs, whatever, boost to any steel type move, including its own. And so Berserker next to something that has steel type coverage is going to be able to output a lot of damage. Like I said, 110 base attack is very strong. It's not excellent, but steel is a really good type. And again, having something next to it that it can exploit that ability, super strong. Tough Claws is also really good if you wanted to run it, giving it that boost to physical moves like Iron Head, which is mostly what it runs, or Close Combat, which it also uses pretty frequently. Pincurchin is also very strong. Not very strong, I shouldn't say that, but it's a lot better than people give it credit for. We've seen Wolf Glick use it to a lot of success, honestly, with Rising Voltage and Electric Surge, super strong. Or if he wants to bring a team that's more weak to Electric, which he doesn't have, he has no electric weaknesses, okay. But like, if his opponent has a strong electric type like Xurkitree, being able to nullify its attacks with Lightning Rod and catch him off guard, you think it's Electric Surge, it's not. That's really strong. Hitmonlee is not something you want to ignore. Unburden is a really strong ability, especially in doubles. If he puts a weakness policy on this thing and gets some way to activate it, that is a scary, scary Pokemon. Certainly, again, not the greatest, but if you underestimate that thing, you're gonna be in for a bad time. Coughing is coughing. I think this is quite distinctly the weakest mon here. I don't really foresee it coming to many, if any, matches. Because it doesn't get neutralizing gas, which is a big component in the success of its evolutions. And it doesn't really do anything. If he's looking for a Will-O-Wisp user, yeah, it can do that, but Dusknoir gets Will-O-Wisp too, and it's just a better Pokemon. I don't see Coughing ever coming, but looking at the rest of the team, this is really scary. It's not perfect. As we can see down here at the bottom, its physical attacking prowess is significantly higher than its special attacking. So if someone has like a super strong physical wall, which we've seen a couple of, this team is going to be in some trouble. Certainly not any trouble it can't deal with, but not in a great spot. And then if we come down here and we look at the weaknesses, for something that was drafted randomly, it comes out pretty good. A pretty big weakness to ground, which isn't fantastic, but everything else is something that's honestly pretty easy to work around. I think it has better chemistry than I ever would have expected from something that was drafted completely at random. I think this team is really scary. It certainly does have some flaws, but this is one to look out for. I think Ruby is going to be able to pilot it with ease. I think this is going to take a lot of wins this season, so make sure to keep an eye out for this one. Super strong. I think this is an A-tier team. Super good. Definitely be on the lookout for it. Up next, we have the Fuchsia City Royals, piloted by Popos. I'm scared of this team, so no preamble, let's get into it. Gmax Kingler, Indeedee Female, Porygon 2, Aegislash, Charizard, Galarian Slowking, Chansey, Alolan Exeggutor, Machamp, Shuckle, and Wartortle. This is a Trick Room team, and it is a scary Trick Room team. It has the best redirector in the game with Indeedee, a fantastic Trick Room setter with Porygon 2. Galarian Slowking gets it as well, and so does Exeggutor, so he has options. Gmax Kingler. Kingler's attack is so high. It's ridiculous. Aegislash, super strong. especially with stance change. Very good, very versatile Pokemon. Um, Charizard isn't like the greatest under Trick Room, but I mean, it doesn't really matter because you want to have something that can function outside of Trick Room, and he does. Galarian Slowking, super strong under Trick Room. 110 special attack is really good. Psychic Poison has great coverage. It can eliminate anything on the opposing side that it wants to set up. Chansey is great under Trick Room. It can, I believe it gets Ally Switch, Aromatherapy, or Heal Bell, or whatever. It gets Wish. Seismic Toss, reliable damage. Heal Pulse to heal the allies, fantastic. Alolan Executor, very strong. Typically a special attacker. Base 120 is really good, and it gets good coverage. Grass and Dragon is a great type to have together. But it can run a physical set. 105 is certainly nothing to scoff at, which I say a lot, but it's like that kind of range, right? Like 90 to 105 is like it's not colossal, but it'll do work. So if it has those two options, fantastic under Trick Room. Machamp, very strong, base 130, strong under Trick Room again. Shuckle speaks for itself. And then Wartortle, which may seem not fantastic, but it has some stuff that it can do. It gets Fake Out, which is super important. Jeez. Water type is good. Shell Smash if it really wants to, but again, I think this is mostly going to be under Trick Room. And so with that said, Wartortle has some utility. I believe it gets Follow Me as well. Scald can fish for burns again. Obviously, if you can stop Trick Room from going up, then this team doesn't do great. But with with two very reliable setters and Alolan Executor, if it really comes down to it, I think you can only keep Trick Room from going up for so long against this team, because if it's trying to set it up, it's going to set it up. It's very bulky. You can't tear through this team before Taunt wears off. And with Indeedee using Follow Me and all those users, I really think in any battle it's just going to be a matter of time. This team is super, super strong, super scary, good type matchups pretty much everywhere. A couple negative, but really not that big of a deal. This team is really well balanced, and it's very scary. The chemistry is fantastic. The Pokemon are strong. Everything just works really well together. I think this is our first S tier team. So good, especially under Trick Room, which is so potent in the metagame. Just absolutely monstrous, I think. I'm very scared of that team. Super be sure to keep an eye on that one, because if Popos can pilot it well, which he can, then that team is going to make waves. And it's something that realistically we should all be scared of. Up next, we have the Gardener Guzzlords, coached by Bubble Hulk. This team has G-Max Rillaboom, Incineroar, Tapu Fini, Crobat, Escavalier, Sableye, Drampa, Rhydon, Weezing, Duosion, and Magneton. This team, again, just like before, this team comes out swinging. Incineroar, G-Max Rillaboom, and Tapu Fini are so good together. Firewater Grass is a fantastic core, and these are some of, if not the best, of each of those types. Super terrifying. Crobat is really, really scary. Base 130 speed stat is absolutely through the roof. It's outrunning most things. And then its attacking stats aren't super high, but they can do work if they need to. He has good access to moves, covers poison, has poison type moves, so it covers Fairy, which is a really good type to have good matchups against. So it does really well there. It also gets some good utility, specifically Tailwind. Tailwind off of a base 130 speed stat is really, really good, especially considering there are only two Prankster Tailwind users. which will outrun it, of course, but other than that, this might be the fastest Tailwind setter. The Scavalier is super scary. It hits like a truck. It has fantastic coverage. Sableye with Prankster, super annoying. Quash is annoying. Will-O-Wisp is annoying. Recover is annoying. Taunt is annoying. It has a lot of utility, and I think it's going to do really well. Drampa is scary. 135 special attack is colossal. It also gets Tailwind. I don't foresee it using it very much, but I mean, it's an option that it has. And then with Berserk, raising its special attack when it drops below a certain threshold, it gets even scarier. Rhydon is really good. Base 130 attack stat is crazy, and it's going to have Eviolite on it almost all the time. Lightning Rod to give electric immunity so that it can draw away those attacks from important teammates that don't want to take those, specifically Crobat and Tapu Fini. Hits like a truck, takes hits like a champ. Yes, it has 2 4x weaknesses, but it doesn't really matter. It's that thing is going to put in work. Wheezing is really good. Neutralizing Gas is super, super useful against things with really scary abilities. Obviously, I don't have to explain what Wheezing does. Another Will-O-Wisp user, if it really comes down to it. Pain Split is good for keeping itself alive and damaging the other people, so it has good utility. Its special attack is fine. Again, Poison is a really good type to have. Sludge Bomb is good. It also gets Shadow Ball. Ghost type is fantastic coverage, and considering Sableye can't do it super well, it's nice to have that on Wheezing. Duosion is kind of like Rhydon. It's going to be super bulky with that Eviolite, and base 125 special attack is very high. Magneton, same story. Great coverage, great type, great special attack, good bulk with the Eviolite. I think there are some people who are sleeping on this team. I think it's very strong. Yes, it has 3 Eviolite users, and it has a couple of repeat types, but it has the important ones, right? Right up here, right out the gate, you have your Fire, Water, Grass. You have fairy coverage in both forms. You have Steel with Escavalier and with Magneton. You have Poison with Crobat. Flying means you have something that's off the ground, which is really, really important. You have your Dark type. You have your Psychic type. You have your Electric immunity, and it takes stuff in. So it really has all the all-around stuff that I'm kind of looking for in a draft. It also thrives under Trick Room or outside of Trick Room. Like I said, it has a couple of Tailwind setters, and when you look at the things that it has that crush under Trick Room, Escavalier, Drampa, Rhydon, these two, it's crazy good. And then Tapu Fini is good under Trick Room. Obviously, it's not necessarily on the same level just because 85 speed is a little high to be ideal. But like with min speed, it can definitely make things happen. And then outside of Trick Room, Rillaboom is always putting in work either way. Incineroar is putting in work either way. I don't have to explain why Incineroar is good. If you need to know why Incineroar is good, I don't know, man. Watch any VGC that happened since the day it came out. Super strong. Crobat is doing well outside of it. It's setting Tailwind so that the slower things that do well in Trick Room still can put up a fight against faster Pokemon. I think Magneton is doing work in and out, just mostly in it. So it has speed control. It has terrain control. Rillaboom is great, especially for ignoring redirection. You have Fake Out in a couple of places. It's just, I don't know. This team, I think, is really, really strong. I'm really scared of this team, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think this team is definitely going places. I think this is our second S tier. Super strong, very versatile, good mons, good chemistry, good everything. It's fantastic, and people should be scared of this team. Up next, we have the Great Lakes Grimmsnarls, coached by Wakeman. And this team has Gmax Cinderace, Clefairy, Spectrier, Braviary, Liepard, Gardevoir, Golurk, Luxray, Tentacruel, Serena, and Clang. I like this team. It looks pretty strong. Um, Gmax Cinderace, always good. Cinderace is an incredibly strong Pokemon, and being able to ignore redirection with its max move is still very good, just like it was when Rillaboom could do it. Avoiding redirection is always really potent, and compared with the offensive pressure that it puts out, it's a really, really solid pick. Clefairy's also a really solid pick, fantastic support Pokemon. Eats hits like a champ. Friend Guard is fantastic. Follow Me is just so good, which is the reason redirection is so good, or avoiding redirection is so good, because redirection is also good. I don't have to explain this every time. But yeah, Friend Guard, Follow Me, Eviolite, Heal, Pulse. This thing takes hits, and it supports really, really well. Spectrier, I think, pairs really well with Clefairy, because while base 145 special attack is absolutely insane, because its coverage is so low, being like Ghost and Dark, which is probably the worst coverage or coverage combination possible. Being able to sit next to Clefairy uses Follow Me, and Spectrier uses Nasty Plot. That's a really scary thing to be facing down. Even if you have resists, Nasty Plot Spectrier is tearing holes in teams, especially considering how fast it is. Braviary is an interesting pick. Its attack is really high. Its speed is not fantastic. However, it gets Tailwind, which is really helpful, so it can kind of like help itself in that sense. And then if Tailwind gets up, or any kind of speed control gets up, Braviary is going crazy. 123 base attack is super high. Brave Bird is very strong. With Sheer Force or even Defiant, it can really, really jack up that power level. Sheer Force, if it wants to just run full power set, like with no hinges or hindrances. But if his opponent has like an Intimidate Mon, Defiant can come, and it can really turn that on its head, because that's what Defiant does. Liepard is a sleeper pick, 100% sleeper pick. That thing has so much utility. The fact that it's not used all the time blows my mind. The actual reason is that it's kind of frail, but it gets Fake Out, it gets Taunt, it gets Sunny Day and Rain Dance, in case you're using Weather. This team doesn't, but it doesn't really matter. Its speed pat is at 106, which isn't fantastic, but it is really good. It's no Spectrier, but it does outrun a lot of things. So it's a really good support Mon, but also with strong moves like U-turn. U-turn is another utility one, sorry, but like Gunk Shot is really strong. I believe it gets Knockoff, although it might be a transfer move. I'll have to check. Liepard is a really good Mon, and you have to find a way to kill it fast, or it's gonna set up its teammates really, really well. Gardevoir I haven't really seen, but because it's so strong, I don't really see any huge issues with it. It can set screens if it really wants to, but more often than not, it's going to punch holes with its great coverage and really high special attack stat. It's a really scary Mon. You can't let Tailwind go up, because not only is Braviary gonna run fades, Gardevoir is gonna do the same. Golurk is a really, really strong Trick Room answer. If someone comes against this team with Trick Room, Golurk is going to be right there to catch them. Ghost Spam is super, super strong, and Golurk with 124 attack and something like Iron Fist to power up Shadow Punch, super, super strong. So you have to be able to account for that if you're trying to run Trick Room against this team. Luxray is an interesting pick. It's not the most orthodox Pokemon, but Intimidate is always a fantastic ability. Guts with Flame Orb is something that is reliable, as we've seen with a Pokemon like Conkeldurr. So I don't think it'll be doing the most work, but it is something to definitely keep your wits about you around, because if you ignore it, it's gonna cause problems. Tentacruel is another mon that I think is a sleeper pick. It's really bulky, especially physical defense is not fantastic, but base 80 HP is pretty solid. It's got a good typing. Liquid Ooze is nice for something that wants to take its health away, obviously. Clear Body is good because stat drops are all over the place, and being able to avoid those is really, really nice. Water Poison is a pretty solid defensive type. It's not the greatest, considering Poison is weak to some pretty important things like Psychic and Ground, but Water is a good defensive type overall. It gets Rapid Spin in case someone wants to be freaky and set up entry hazards. I believe it gets Knockoff, but again, that might be a transfer-only move. Sword Stance it gets for no reason, so if you want to catch someone off guard and run physical Tentacruel, I mean, I guess. I think it's good. People sleep on Tentacruel. I think it's going to put in more work than people are giving it credit for. Sarina is ridiculous. Queenly Majesty is one of the best VGC abilities in the game. The fact that this thing doesn't see more play blows my mind. Stopping Priority is super, super potent because it stops, like, all of it. Like, if someone wants to prankster taunt your Tailwind Mon, they can't. If they want to fake something out to keep it from setting up or to keep it from doing whatever it wants to do, can't. Priority is really, really strong, and the ability to stop it just by existing is also very, very strong. Clang is an interesting pick. I don't really know what it's going to do, but it can set up if you're not careful, especially considering the access to redirection that this team has. So, who knows? Maybe we'll see work from Clang. It is his resident steel type, so it's possible, but I'm really not sure. Overall, I think the team is a little... It's good. It's strong. Absolutely. The speed tiers are a little all over the place, but it's not too bad. If he can get Tailwind up with Braviary, it's gonna do wonders. But if he doesn't manage to, then I don't know. He won't be in the most trouble, but it won't be great for him if someone has like a taunt user kind of in bad shape. Not in bad shape, but you know what I mean. Overall, I think a lot of these mons are really strong. I think they're gonna put in a lot of work for him. Like I said, the speed tiers are kind of all over the place, but overall, I think it's strong. I think this is an A tier team. Up next, we have the Greedy Greninjas, coached by Sasori, having Gmax Snorlax, Regirock, Rillaboom, Togekiss, Araquanid, Noivern, Jolteon, Musharna, Kingler, Turtonator, and Wigglytuff. This team feels weird to me. Of course, Rillaboom is really strong. Access to Fake Out is fantastic. Grassy Glide is really good. It has a lot of different variety. You can run Assault Vest. You can run Choice Band. You can run Life Orb. You can run it defensive if you really want to. Good coverage with high horsepower and knockoff and all that business. It has a really good moveset. Rillaboom is really strong. Togekiss is really strong. It can be offensive in really whatever way you'd like. 120 special attack is really, really strong, and with access to max airstream, it's definitely a force to be reckoned with. Fairy is also really strong type, and then it also has a lot of utility, especially with Follow Me. I believe it gets access to Tailwind. It can put in a lot of work. Regirock feels like a weird pick. Aside from, like, Rock Slide, I don't really know what it's supposed to do. Even with Rock Polish, it's gonna get outsped by most things, and it doesn't really have time to set up, like, Curse. Um, it seems like an underwhelming pick for me. Gmax Snorlax is, of course, really strong. Belly Drum with Gluttony being able to give it a huge, huge attack boost to an already pretty high attack stat is really, really nice. And then of bringing itself back up to almost full with its Pinch Berry activating earlier is fantastic. Araquanid is kind of funky. It gets Sticky Web, but again, entry hazards aren't a huge thing in VGC, but it could turn the tide a little bit. Other than that, its stats aren't fantastic, aside from special defense. I don't really foresee it doing much of anything. Noivern is good. Boom Burst is a good move. Hyper Voice, Dragon Pulse, Max Airstream, again, is a great move to have access to. But its stats, again, are nothing to write home about. Of course, it's super fast, but, I don't know, 97 special attack, while certainly nothing to scoff at, isn't super fantastic, and considering its strongest move, Boom Burst, also hits its partner, kind of problematic there, so kind of has to rely on Hyper Voice, which doesn't quite as much make up for its lower special attack. Of course, it gets Infiltrator, which is nice. It can bypass screens. Frisk is a really useful ability for finding out your opponent's items, which is huge. Having that knowledge is really, really important. But after it hits the field and gives that knowledge, it doesn't really do much. It's weak to some really important types, specifically Dragon, which is kind of a two-way street. Dragon is a weird type matchup because it's an important type to have, but it's also... Anyway, you know what I'm saying. Weak to Fairy is a big deal. 4 times weakness to Ice is really exploitable, considering how widespread Ice Beam is, or Icy Wind, or Ice Shard, whatever. Ice is kind of all over the place, and that weakness is not fantastic. Jolteon, I think, is a sleeper pick. Volt Absorb is really nice, because a lot of his stronger Pokemon are weak to it. Not a lot. That's not entirely correct, but Togekiss is weak to it, which is a big deal. Araquanid is weak to it. Noivern doesn't want to take an electric hit for sure. Kingler is weak to it, so having that immunity so that your opponent always has to really think before they click an electric move is nice. And of course it hits really hard and it's super fast. Probably the best electric type in the draft, if I'm being completely honest, just because no one drafted Regieleki, and so that's off the board. And, well, sorry, second best. Coco is better, but other than that, Jolteon is a fantastic pick. Musharna doesn't really fit in here because it's very distinctly a Trick Room Pokemon. And up until this point, we haven't seen a single good Trick Room Mon, aside from maybe Regirock, but even then it's kind of questionable. Snorlax, of course, can do okay in Trick Room, but it's not necessarily a Trick Room staple, just because having both of your Mons have to set up on the same turn with one doing Belly Drum and one doing Trick Room isn't ideal, because it gives your opponent time to do really whatever they want. Fake Out, you don't have any way to stop. Will-O-Wisp is really strong against Snorlax. Taunt, there are lots of ways to stop a lead where both of those leads are being completely passive on turn 1. So, of course, Musharna is strong and it's pretty bulky, but because Trick Room isn't super easy to pull off on the team, it's kind of a funky pick. It gets Wish, which is nice for passing, but Wish passing isn't super common in VGC. Kingler and Turtonator and Wigglytuff can all do pretty well in Trick Room, but Kingler can get outslowed by other Mons with a base 75 speed stat. Turtonator, it's not that strong. It's more defensive than offensive, and to really get it set up, you have to use Shell Smash, which, of course, doubles its special attack, which is very scary, but also increases its speed, which is not good for Trick Room. So while Turtonator does have that ability, it's not really super strong in Trick Room. And then outside of Trick Room, if something uses Taunt on Turtonator reading that Shell Smash, then it's kind of in a really bad spot because 36 is very slow and 91 special attack is not fantastic. And speaking of that speed tier, even with a Shell Smash up, base 36 is not passing a lot of things. And then Wigglytuff, I think Wigglytuff is a sleeper pick. Intimidate is all over the place, and competitive doubling your special attack anytime it happens is fantastic. And any max move that lowers a stat will boost that as well. I think competitive is a really good ability in VGC. However, because of its lackluster speed, it can't really capitalize on that outside of Trick Room, which again is not super easy to pull off with this team. It's certainly possible. I think Sasori could pull it off, but it's gonna be really tricky. It's not gonna be easy. And with just 85 special attack, it's still not the strongest thing in the world. So while I think it's going to do better than people might initially give it credit for, it's still not incredible, you know? Overall, I think this team definitely has some strong mons, but it's really, I don't know. I don't really think they mesh together very well. We'll see. For sure, I'm potentially wrong, but as it stands right now, without seeing how Sasori pilots it, I think this is a C-tier team. Hopefully I get proven wrong. Of course, I want to see everyone succeed, but I don't know. The team is weird, and at the moment, I can't justify putting it any higher. Up next, we have the Island Dragons, coached by Hawk, containing G-Max Charizard, Dragonite, Garchomp, Tapu Lele, Dragalge, Hitmontop, Cottonee, Klinklang, Galarian Rapidash, Celio, and Unfezant. Right off the bat, Charizard, especially G-Max Charizard, likes to be under Sun. Solar Power is a ridiculous ability. It's a choice specs boost under Sun. Life Orb Charizard with that ability is insane. I've used it before. I have a mono fire type team that has G-Max Charizard on it. It's next to a Sunsetter, and I have O-code a Pelipper before. Like, full special defense investment. This thing is no joke. It's not something to mess around with. With access to Blast Burn, giving its G-Max Wildfire 150 base power, plus the 1.5 times boost from Solar Power, plus the 1.3 times boost from Life Orb, plus stab bonus, plus the Sun boost just in general to Fire-type moves. This Mon is insane under Sun. However, he doesn't have a dedicated Sunsetter, and because G-Max Charizard's Fire-type move is its G-Max move, it can't set Sun, which means that if he wants it to be under Sun, he has to spend his G-Max on someone else, or G-Max Charizard without Sun. Or maybe he runs, like, Sunny Day Cottonee, but even then, it's not super reliable. And then after that, we have 1, 2, 3 dragon types right out the gate, which is kind of problematic. And then Tapu Lele is a fairy, Rapidash is a fairy, so 2 fairies. So not a lot of type diversity. Of course, you have their secondary typings, but again, it's like Tapu Lele and Galarian Rapidash have the same typing. Dragonite and Charizard are both flying types, and Unfezant is a flying type as well. And so that's a lot of repeat types right there. And then, of course, you have a few unique typings. He does have Fire, Water, Grass, which it's a big thing for me. I know I keep coming back to this concept of having cores, but it's really important to have a grouping of types that can really cover each other's weaknesses. And so having one or two of those is a really big deal to me. That's why I have all three. It's on purpose. But so while that is something that I'm looking for, it's not necessary. However, he does have fire, water, grass, except two of those things are not fully evolved. There's no offensive pressure coming off of either of those things. So it's not super super complete. And then his only steel type is Kling Klang, which is not something to be ignored, but it's not super threatening. Like, yeah, its attack is 100, which is fine, and it's kind of bulky, but it has to set up if it wants to be successful. It has to be able to use shift gear, and without any follow me users, it's gonna be really hard to do. There is some good utility here. Hitmontop is a fantastic Pokemon. Fake Out is really good, and Intimidate is fantastic. The combination of those two things, plus its natural bulk, is fantastic. It's a big part of the reason why Incineroar is so good. And so to have those two things together is really, really important, and it's really good. Cottony gets Prankster Tailwind, which is a really big deal. It doesn't get a ton of the moves that Whimsicott gets, but it does get that one, which is important. So that's nice. But then other than that, it's kind of like, I don't know. It just feels weird. Like, if we look at the matchup spread, this is more negatives than I've seen on most other teams. I think on any other team. And so it's like, I feel like the type spread is not incredible. There is some cheese. I really like Unfezant. It was on my radar to draft because you can run like Scope Lens, Super Luck, and then Night Slash, Air Cutter, or whatever, and just guarantee a crit every time. So there's some cheese aspect there. Coming off of 115 attack is pretty good. And so, honestly, I think Unfezant is one of the stronger mons on this team because I don't see Celio really doing very much. I don't see Galarian Rapidash doing very much. Kling Klang can do work, but it's only under a very specific set of circumstances that's hard to get to. Cottony has good utility, but it's not really enough. And then Hitmontop has utility as well, but again, not a ton. And then 3 dragon types right out the gate. No Sun for Gmax Charizard and Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele is important to address because, again, Fairy type is an important type to have, and Psychic is also a really good type, and Psychic Surge can stop priority, which is really important. But aside from, like, some little things here and there, it feels like the Pokemon are good, but I feel like the chemistry here is really lacking. I'm not particularly scared of this team, if I'm being completely honest with you. Like, if I bring an ice type, I'm gonna do pretty well. Which is crazy. Like, obviously, it's not the worst weakness to have, but again, like I said before, Ice Beam is pretty widespread. Ice coverage is on most teams, and there are some really strong ice types out there. Glastrier is out there. Galarian Darmanitan is out there. It didn't get drafted yet, but, like, it exists. Mamoswine is out there. Even Piloswine. Like, having that weakness is not great. And, I don't know. I feel like the amount of utility that it has can't cover for the fact that they don't really work together all that well. Maybe they have aspects that that Hawk knows about that I don't. But from what I can tell, this team needs to do some trading. For sure, some free agency. I think that the overall feel of this team is not fantastic. And for that reason, I think this is our first D tier draft. Um, Hopefully it turns around. Hopefully I'm wrong. I would love to see Hawk pilot this better than I could possibly expect, which wouldn't surprise me. But just looking at the Pokemon, it's it's not good. Next up, we have the Las Tediersas, coached by the Fifth Leaf, with G-Max Gengar, Kartana, Primarina, Alakazam, Hydreigon, Umbreon, Dugtrio, Lapras, Wobbuffet, Emolga, and Flareon. The entire time we were drafting, Leaf was like, I'm not drafting Perish Trap. It's not Perish Trap. It's Perish Trap. Whether he runs it like that or not, that's what this team is. G-Max Gengar with its G-Max move traps people. I didn't know this. Kartana gets Perish Song. Primarina gets it. Dugtrio with Arena Trap. Lapras gets Perish Song and Whirlpool, which is an excellent and efficient trapping method. Wobbuffet gets Shadow Tag to keep people there. And it's just, this is a really, really potent Shadow Trap, Perish Trap team. But even without leaning on Perish Trap, this team is terrifying. You have almost no type repetition. Every type, or almost every type, is represented here. Ghost, Poison, Grass, Steel, Water, Fairy, Psychic, Dark, Dragon, Ground, Water, Electric, Fire. It has every important type on a really strong Mon. It has a pretty even split of support with Mons like Umbreon, Lapras, Wobbuffet, physical pressure with Kartana, Dugtrio, Flareon again, special Gengar, Primarina, Alakazam, Hydreigon, support with sorry, I feel like I already said that, but like Umbreon is fantastic support with Protect, Wish, Taunt. Every Pokemon gets Protect, I don't know what I'm talking about. Emolga gets Tailwind, I believe. Types are perfect. The Mons are terrifying. It can be really any game plan. Because, like I said, without Perish Trap, this team is still really strong. Kartana's terrifying. Primarina, terrifying. Alakazam, super strong. Hydreigon, like everything. If I was listing all the threatening Mons on this team, or all the Mons that did something, it would be all of them. This team has everything that I look for in a draft, and I am so scared to fight it. This team is going places, and this is an S tier team. Super scary. Leaf is going to pop off with this team no matter what way he decides to run it. He has everything, all the utility, all the offensive prowess, defensive, weird stuff, cheese, everything. He has it all. This team is mortifying. Keep an eye on him. Up next, we have the Meltan Nuts, coached by Ryan, containing G-Max Lapras, Amoonguss, Metagross, Galarian Moltres, Chandelure, Raichu, Sigilif, Swampert, Hitmonchan, Pinsir, and Solrock. I think this team looks really strong. Whether he wants to set up Trick Room with any of his three setters, being Chandelure, Sigilif, and Solrock, he would do well. If he doesn't want to, if he wants to just slow down the pace, Amoonguss is great at that. Setting up screens with Lapras is fantastic. Weakness Policy Metagross pops off whether it's in Trick Room or not. Galarian Moltres can do well anywhere. Berserk, Nasty Plot, good special defense, good coverage. Chandelure can do a lot of things. If you want to run a scarf set, you can do like trick, or you can just do regular scarf. You can do imprison to stop other people from setting up trick room. That has a lot of tech. Raichu is better than people give it credit for. Nuzzle is a fantastic move. It's 100% accurate. It makes contact and it paralyzes 100% of the time. It's just Thunder Wave, but better. It gets fake out. Lightning Rod is always a useful ability, so you can absorb those electric type attacks. Sigilif is fantastic. I think Sigilif is a huge sleeper pick. With utility like Tailwind, Magic Guard. You can run a spec set if you really feel like it with Tinted Lens. With Magic Guard, you can run like Flame Orb, Cosmic Power, and then, sorry, I'm blanking. I know what the move is called, but the one where you switch the move to the other person. I believe it gets Imprison as well. And again, Trick Room. Swampert is just good all the time. It's Swampert. I don't think I have to explain that. Flip Turn is good. It's got a fantastic typing. Good moves, good attack stat. It can be defensive, it can be offensive. Just a really good pick there. Hitmonchan, it's not bad. I haven't seen Hitmonchan really do very much in anything ever, but it is a fighting type, which is an important type to have. Iron Fist, with all of its punching moves, can really ramp up that power. It's not the most versatile thing, but I imagine there are a couple ways you could run it. Pinsir is good. 85 speed is a little weird because it's not great in or out of Trick Room, but if you wanna, like, if you're doing min speed because you're planning on doing Trick Room, a lot of people are gonna outspeed it regardless, so it just depends on your planning. I know I've taken points from people in the past and for having a weird speed tier that doesn't really fit in either. And yes, that still applies here, but it is important to mention that if you know what you're doing with the numbers, a higher speed tier can still be manageable depending on who you go up against and how EV spreads are. Solrock is a little weird. It's not a great Pokemon, and by that I mean it's a bad Pokemon, but it does get Rock Slide, which is a good move in VGC. It also gets Imprison, Trick Room, I believe it gets Will-O-Wisp. It gets Recovery for itself, which isn't super common in VGC, but if you really want to slow the pace down, which this team does, Recovery can come in pretty handy. Overall, I think the type spread is really good. You got Fire, Water, Grass. They're all really strong. You have your Steel type. It is missing a Fairy type, which isn't great because Fairy is kind of an important type to have. So the fact that it's missing that is not fantastic. But other than that, it's got a lot of really important stuff. It's got a good mix of utility and offensive, and while it does have a pretty linear game plan, which is to play relatively slowly until you can position your pieces correctly, there are a few mons that can play a couple of different ways that can really mix up that strategy. I don't think this is a perfect team, but it's still one to be scared of. I think this is A tier. I think it's going to do pretty well, as long as it's piloted well, which I think it will be. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Steel types, coached by Rhett, containing G-Max Corviknight, Arcanine, Dragapult, Boltund, Mudsdale, Galarian Weezing, Cloyster, Sceptile, Xatu, Cloyster, and Galarian Linoone. Right off the bat, the Pokemon down here in the lower tiers are not great. Unburden is always a great ability talking about Sceptile. Unburden is a great ability in VGC because you can Dynamax and eat a super effective hit and pop Weakness Policy, double both of your attacking stats and your speed, and become an absolute menace. Cloyster can do some stuff, especially with that huge special attack stat. I think it's going to pair really well with Galarian Wheezing because of Terrain Pulse being boosted by Mega Launcher, and again, coming off of a really strong attack stat, or special attack stat, that chemistry is really good. But once you get beyond that, it's like Boltund is not good. It's just worse Jolteon. It's slower and it's weaker. Yes, it can do more stuff. You can run Strong Jaw if you want to run physical, or competitive if you want to run special, and neither of them is necessarily better than the other because both of its attacking stats are even at 90. But 90 isn't a great number, and the Strong Jaw boost only does so much, and competitive only activates sometimes, so it's not super reliable. Mudsdale is kind of weird. I don't know. I feel like it kind of just dies, but at the same time, it's got 125 attack. Ground is a really good attacking type. It gets Rock Slide, which, again, is very good in VGC considering how high your chance is to flinch something. So if it can stay alive, it'll do work, but Ground does have a lot of exploitable weaknesses, so that might be a little tricky. Xatu is good. It can set up screens. But aside from that, it doesn't do too much else. Yes, it has Ally Switch, which is a big thing, and Magic Bounce if you want to bounce back something like Will-O-Wisp comes to mind because that's a big thing for me. Thunder Wave, Yawn, Sleep Powder, all that stuff. Tailwind it gets. Actually, I take it back. Xatu is a sleeper pick, and the amount of utility that I just listed off is ridiculous. Even I was about to brush this thing to the side, but it has a lot of stuff that it can do. Cloyster needs to set up with Shell Smash. It doesn't do much else aside from that. And so if it can do that, Cloyster, of course, is scary. But if it doesn't manage to do that, because it is a tricky thing, then it kind of just exists. Yeah, 95 is certainly nothing to scoff at, but I don't know. It's nothing special to me. And then Galarian Linoon is bad. Yes, of course, it gets Parting Shot and it gets Taunt, but aside from that, if this mon is on the field, I don't care. It doesn't really do much. However, we skip the higher tiers, and I think these three up at the top specifically are very, very strong. Arcanine, I would argue, is the most versatile out of the three of these. You can run a physical set, you can run a special set, if you want to run Life Orb on either of those, because it gets Flare Blitz, Wild Charge, Crunch, good physical moves, it gets good special moves, or you can run it like more utility. It gets Will-O-Wisp. Intimidate is a fantastic ability. Flash Fire is a good ability. Justified can be a good thing to like catch your opponent off guard. If he has a beat up user, he can use that to really jack up that attack stat. Like I said, and then it gets Will-O-Wisp, it gets Morning Sun. So there's a lot of stuff that Arcanine can do. A lot of people say it's just worse in Incineroar, which is true, but it does do different things, and it has different possibilities. I think it's a really, really strong flex pick, and I think it's something to keep an eye out for. Dragapult is a little more one-dimensional, but not by a ton. I've seen Weakness Policy Aqua Jet. On that, it can run double screens, it can run a special set, which is what it usually does, but physical sets are certainly possible. If you want it to be your Dynamax target, it gets plenty of moves to sustain you through that. Corviknight, I think, is really good, especially G-Max, because it can get rid of screens, which are pretty prominent in VGC, all things considered, and so getting rid of those is nice. Of course, losing the speed boost from regular Max Airstream isn't fantastic, but I don't think it's super pressing here. Max Steel Spike is always good. Corviknight kind of just puts off pressure when it's on the field, pun intended, And although it's not the strongest thing, you don't really ever know what it's going to do. Mirror Armor is a great ability for bouncing back Intimidate. It can set up Hone Claws. It can be like a Choice Band or Life Orb set for more immediate pressure. It can be Tailwind if you want it to be support. I believe it gets Taunt, which is also really good. So I think Corviknight is a really good choice. It's not super all over the place in the VGC metagame, but Draft League meta and VGC meta are very different. I think Corviknight is going to do really well. And then, of course, Neutralizing Gas from Wheezing. Of course, I mentioned Misty Surge earlier paired with Cloyster, but if Cloyster doesn't come, Neutralizing Gas is always a fantastic, fantastic ability to have, as long as you're pairing it with the right partner so that you don't cripple it. So it has some utility. It has some interesting things that it can do. But overall, I think there are just a couple too many Pokemon that I think are just a little too weak. It certainly has potential, but I think as it stands right now, this is a B tier team. And I know that Rhett is a very good trainer, and so I have no doubt that he'll be able to use it to its fullest potential. I just don't know how far that fullest potential will go with this specific team. Next up, we have the Rock'em Sock'ems, coached by Senpai, with Gmax Blastoise, Landorus Therian, Rotom Heat, Virizion, Alolan Persian, Galarian Slowbro, Marowak, Cantonian, Palisand, Cinccino, Lickitung, and Sock. There are definitely some good mons on this team. Just looking at chemistry, though, boom, 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 right off the bat, Blastoise, Rotom, Virizion, Fire, Water, Grass, excellent. And then Virizion, Persian, and Slowbro cover Fighting, Dark, Psychic. And then you have your Ghost type with Palisand. Marowak and Palisand are both immune to Electric, of course, which is a big deal. But Marowak, especially with Lightning Rod, being able to draw it in from his teammates who might be weak to it, specifically Gmax Blastoise, which is really useful, considering Gmax Blastoise can be very, very scary, and keeping one of its weaknesses from hitting it is super useful. Landorus Therian, always scary, always a good mon. A third ground type, which is mildly problematic, depending on what type you're going up against, but it is what it is. Rotom Heat gives you something off the ground. Fire and Electric, good special attack. You can run it like Trick, you can run Will-O-Wisp, or you can go full-out offensive, Overheat, Thunderbolt, etc. Virizion is a really good mon. I like Justified, especially if you have a beat-up user, which I think Cinccino gets beat up, but I could be wrong. But regardless, Virizion is a very scary Pokemon. Yes, its attacking stats are only 90, but again, Justified is good. It gets Sword Stance. It gets a really good assortment of moves. And while base 108 is certainly not the highest speed stat, it is past that 100 benchmark, which is good. So it's got decent speed. It's a really good max target. It's got a really good type. Virizion is certainly not the scariest thing in existence, but it is something that you should probably be at least a little frightened of. Alolan Persian I like a lot. Fake Out is good. Taunt, always fantastic to have. All of its abilities can be useful in some way, which is nice. Fur Coat, which would make it really pretty bulky. Technician is good to boost moves like U-Turn if you want to run it, boost Fake Out. Rattled can be a good thing to catch your opponent off guard, and boost your speed stat, although it is more niche than the other two. Base 115 speed is pretty solid. It's outrunning most things. Not most things, but a lot of things. Galarian Slowbro, I really like. It's not gonna be the best thing, but Quick Draw is really good. Psychic Poison is a great type. Excuse me, base 100 in both attacks means it can be run either way, considering Shell Sidearm is just whichever one is going to do more damage, so you have guaranteed poison move either way. Marowak is kind of entirely one dimensional. It's always going to be running Thick Club. It's always going to be more offensive because it doesn't really get any utility. But that's fine because it's still pretty strong. 80 plus the Thick Club boost is pretty high. Palisand is scary. Ghost Spam is very, very strong. It's another ground type, which, like I said earlier, is not fantastic because they all have pretty exploitable weaknesses. Both of these are weak to grass, and all three of them are weak to water and ice. But there are other things on this team that can cover those weaknesses. Shore Up is really good. We've seen Wolf Glick use this thing to a lot of success. There's definitely a cheese factor in Palisand, although it is difficult to pull off. I like Cinccino a lot with whatever it has. I personally run some more cheese sets that I don't want to reveal, but Cinccino definitely has potential. I'm excited to see how Senpai uses it. Lickitung is a weird pick. I don't know what it does because I'm pretty sure it doesn't do anything. It doesn't really have any good abilities. I mean, Oblivious is good if something sets up, but what's Lickitung gonna do in return, you know? And then we have Sock. I like Sock. 125 attack is really big. It's gonna do a lot of damage. And with Mold Breaker, it can, ignore abilities, which is duh, but, like, specifically in VGC, being able to ignore, like, Levitate is really big. So, if Sock wants to run, like, Earthquake, it's super, super possible. You can run it next to Landorus, and you can kill things like Rotom Wash. Actually, hold on. Now that I think about it, no other Rotom form is on the table. So, not quite as strong, considering Rotom isn't going to be running around, but you can still find uses for Mold Breaker because it's still a really good ability. Inner Focus is good. It prevents Intimidate, which is the biggest thing now. It can't be faked out or intimidated, which is huge for an offensive Pokemon like Sock. And then, of course, Sturdy is good, although I would argue that it's probably the worst out of the three abilities. But if you want to run, like, counter against a really strong physical threat from your opponent, Sturdy can be good to guarantee that you live that move and take them out. So it does have a little bit of cheese factor, but not very much. This team could do pretty well in Trick Room, with Sock being not super slow, but certainly not fast. Lickitung, Palisand, Marowak, Slowbro, Blastoise, again, not super slow, but you can make it work. It's not the easiest Trick Room setup, but it's certainly a possibility if he wants to. Shell Smash on Gmax Blastoise is terrifying. If you let that happen, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble because you can bring in Marowak and all of a sudden you can't hit it with an electric move. Of course, Grass is still on the table, but eliminating one of its two weaknesses like that is a pretty big deal. Overall, I think the chemistry is decent. He's got a good type spread. He's got answers to Trick Room. In retrospect, I don't think he necessarily should bring it, but it is a possibility, and if someone else brings it, then they have answers to it. Good standalone Mons, good Mons that pair together, which is what chemistry is. I don't think it's a perfect team. Like I said earlier, 3 ground types is not fantastic, and there are a couple Pokemon here that are kind of lackluster. But overall, I think it's pretty good. I think that this is a B tier team. Next up, we have the Sandston Scissors, coached by Wolf, containing G-Max Urshifu, Single Strike, Raikou, Thundurus Incarnate, Blastoise, Klefki, Scizor, Galarian Corsola, Espeon, Rotom Frost, Crustle, and Quagsire. Now, these are strong Mons, mostly all around. Rotom Frost is not fantastic, and Galarian Corsola is not fantastic, but other than that, these Mons are really strong. Urshifu is terrifying, whether it's G-Max or not. Completely ignoring Protect is ridiculous. Being able to crit on its stab move every single time, 130 attack, and a half decent speed stat is just ridiculous. Urshifu is so strong. Raikou is good. It's kind of just worse Jolteon, but like it's still really good. It's really fast. It's got a good special attack stat. Kind of one-dimensional, but not a huge deal. Thundurus is, I think, more versatile than people realize. With Prankster, it can run things like Scary Face, where it can just mess with the stats of the opponent in a way that's beneficial to its teammate with whatever move that may be. You can also just run a straight up special set, Life Orb, Choice Specs, take your pick, because that's going to do damage. 125 is high, and with 111 speed, it's going to outrun a good chunk of things. And with some item to boost its power, it's going to punch holes. You can run Nasty Plot if you want to. But the thing that I think people don't realize is that Wolf can just come right out of left field with Defiant Thundurus. And if someone tries to intimidate whatever's next to him, that attack stat goes up. And Thundurus' attack is base 115, which is higher than I realized for sure. I don't think it gets great physical coverage, but if he was looking to catch someone off guard, that would be a great way of doing it. Blastoise, I just talked about on the last team. It's not G-Max, but it doesn't really matter. Shell Smash Dynamax is still really strong, and with the ability to set Rain, it can boost its stab moves and activate Rain Dish if he wants to run that. Klefki is a really good mon. Steel Fairy is a fantastic typing. Prankster with screens, Thunder Wave, all that business is excellent. Again, kind of one-dimensional, but it doesn't really matter because it's gonna click buttons no matter what. Scizor is strong. It's not as strong as I would like it to be. I love Scizor, but in doubles, it's just, I don't know. Of course it'll do work. Technician is a fantastic ability for moves like Bug Bite in a metagame where berries are all over the place. Technician is good for something like that's what I'm talking about, Jesus. It's really good for a Bullet Punch, which is a really strong stab priority move. It's not very fast, and so because this team doesn't really have a Trick Room mode, the whole it can kind of function in Trick Room thing isn't really on the table. And so if Scizor is going to be successful, it has to make sure that it doesn't have a bad matchup against what's on the field, or it's going to go down fast. And of course that's true of all Pokemon, but because Scizor can't really outspeed anything, like Scizor is the resident Tailwind setter on this team. And because it's so fast or so slow, it's going to get outrun by a lot of things. It could get hit by a surprise Fire-type move, Will-O-Wisp, really whatever. It's pretty easy to address. Galarian Corsola is a similar thing. It's not terrible, but it's not great. If you taunt this Mon, it's not clicking moves. Of course, Nightshade does consistent damage, but aside from that, all it has is like Strength Sap and Will-O-Wisp. Unless you're running entry hazards in VGC, which is weird. Corsola kind of has what I've already addressed as all my friends are dead syndrome. If you click taunt on this thing, you literally just hit whatever's next to it, and it doesn't matter, it can't do anything. Espeon is really good. I think this is a fantastic pick, super sleeper pick. Psychic is a fantastic type. 110 is a good speed tier, especially considering its colossal special attack. Kind of one-dimensional. Again, it's not really going to be anything other than offensive unless he wants to run a weird support set with like Heal Bell, I guess. But it mostly it's just going to be doing damage. Rotom Frost sucks. Crustle is okay. It's an answer to Trick Room, but again, this team doesn't really have a Trick Room mode. It could pull it off if it wanted to, but it's not gonna be great. It does get Shell Smash, which can make this thing really, really scary. 105 plus 2 in attack is super spooky. And yes, while base 45 times 2 even isn't gonna be outrunning everything, it's still a nice boost to have, and considering how bulky this thing is, it can be really scary. Quagsire has all my friends are dead syndrome. Unless it's getting Scald Burns, this mod doesn't really do anything. Its attacking stats aren't good enough to justify running it offensively. Its defensive stats aren't enough to justify running it just defensively. I love this mod in singles, but unless someone is setting up in your face, it's not really going to do anything here. It's got some type repetition, and it's not a huge deal because Raikou and Thundurus don't share any weaknesses, even though they share a type. Same applies to Rotom Frost. Scizor and Klefki share weakness to Fire type, which isn't great because Fire type is pretty prominent. It's a really strong type. But other than that, I think the team is okay. There are some scary mons there are a couple that I think should probably get traded out, but who knows? I'm sure Wolf drafted what he did for a reason, and I'm sure there are things that he'll do with those Pokemon that I don't see coming at the moment. But if I'm right, then this team has some holes that need to be patched. And until that happens, I think this is another B tier team. And last but certainly not least, we have the Worcester Stunfisks, coached by Toast, with Gmax Colossal, Mimikyu, Tapu Bulu, Volcarona, Inteleon, Zoroark, Ice-Q, Slurpuff, Lopunny, Stunfisk, and Toxicroak. This team has a fantastic type spread. It's got it all. Rock, Fire, Ghost, Fairy, Grass, Fairy, Bug, Fire, Water, Dark, Ice, Fairy. Okay, update. I was counting wrong, sorry. It still has a really good spread with Poison, Fighting, Normal, Electric, Ground. It does have 3 fairies that all share some weaknesses, which isn't great. However, Fairy is a really strong type, and so having that one duplicated is not a huge deal. He has some ways of really making Colossal scary. If he wants to run, like, Aqua Jet Ice-Q, he can set off Weakness Policy and Steam Engine to really make that a big threat. He could do it with Inteleon if he really feels like it. Inteleon would be a better pick than Ice-Q now that I think about it. But, like, he has a couple ways of proccing that, which is good. Mimikyu is an interesting Pokemon. I'm not a huge fan of it in VGC, but I know that it has potential. Disguise is still a good ability. Ghost is a fantastic type. So is Fairy. So it's got an excellent typing. Its stats are a little lackluster, but it can make up for those because Disguise lets it essentially get a free sword stance if you're not paying attention. Tapu Bulu is fantastic. It's kind of just worse Rillaboom because it doesn't get Grassy Glide, but it's still good. Fairy is still a good type. Base 130 attack is ridiculous. It's a little one-dimensional, but it's still a good mon and it's still going to do work. Volcarona is very scary. If this thing clicks Quiver Dance, you're in trouble. If it doesn't, it has other options. Bug Fire is a pretty good type unless you're clicking Rock Slide, in which case it kind of just dies. But it's a scary Pokemon. Being able to get Flame Body Cheese against something, that possibility is always nice. Inteleon is not it's not great, but it's certainly not bad. It's fast, it's strong, it's just one-dimensional, which is what makes it not as good as the other starters from this generation. But Sniper is still a cool ability. The fact that its move ignores redirection is really good because, like I've said 100 times in this video, redirection is really prominent because it's very strong, which means counterplay to it is also very strong. Zoroark is interesting. I haven't seen Zoroark, but it's definitely, its presence forces its opponents to think on their toes and always be thinking, is this a Zoroark? Would he bring it in here? And so to always have them second guessing themselves like that is really useful. Ice Q is hard to set up, but if you can set it up, it's insane. Having like a physical disguise and with access to Belly Drum instead of Sword Stance is really, really big. Again, it's not easy because they can take advantage of the fact that you're cutting your health. If they hit you with a special move, you're kind of just straight up out of luck. But if you can pull it off, this becomes a very scary Pokemon. Slurpuff is the same thing, but it's a little more versatile. It can be special if you really want it to, but it also can run that unburdened belly drum. It's not quite as potent in doubles as it is in singles because it doesn't really have spread moves, but if it's not addressed, if it's allowed to get that, you're gonna lose a Mon for sure. So that's a Mon to keep an eye on. Lopunny is bad. Stunfisk is also bad, but not as bad. It gets Thunder Wave, which is good. Static is always a good ability because it's like the Flame Body thing. The chance of getting a paralysis on one of your opponents is always good. Limber is probably its best ability because preventing paralysis on a Mon that's already immune to it is so strong, and Stunfisk is such a good and well-designed Pokemon. It's bad, but it's not as bad as Lopunny. Toxicroak is a sleeper pick. The immunity to, or the potential immunity, I should say, to water-type moves is really good, considering Stunfisk is weak to water, Volcarona is weak to water, and Colossal is weak to water. So having that option is really good. Having the ability also to give every single one of your contact moves a chance to poison is a really interesting thing. Poison isn't the best status condition, but it is the worst. However, if you're going up against a team that wants to play really slow and wants to take you to a timer and all that business, it's nice to be able to get a poison on a team like that. Overall, with the exceptions of Stunfisk and Lopunny, most of these Mons I think are really good and have a lot of potential. Um, Not a ton of utility here, which is not fantastic. Um, it's really offensively oriented, which isn't the worst thing in the world to be certain, but without that kind of support, I worry about how it will perform. Um, the chemistry is good. All in all, I think this is a solid team. I think that maybe swapping out Lopunny or Stunfisk for something that can support its teammates a little more would be a good pick for this team. Um, but until then, I think it's a C tier team. The complete lack of support, it's really easy to shut down. If something is trying to set up, there's stuff to be done about it. If something is just offensive pressure in your face, that's kind of the whole point of support, is to get around that. And so it feels really easy to counterplay. Hopefully we'll see some pickups and some drops that will change that, because I think the team has a lot of potential. But until then, I really can't put it above C, not because it doesn't have strength, because it certainly has raw power, but because that's kind of all it has is raw power. So that's it. This is the tier list. Of course, I wouldn't realistically put my own draft in D tier, but I'm not going to be like, oh, my draft is S tier because I'm amazing. I'm biased, and so I'm not ranking it. But aside from that, this is the tier list. Let me know what you think in the comments, or realistically in the Discord. The coaches who have sent me their stuff will be plugged in the description, so make sure you check that out, and make sure you subscribe so that when battles start going live, you don't miss any of those. I'm really excited to get into this, and hopefully you guys are too. I'll be doing my first battle against Rolo and the Clinton Clefables on Thursday. That'll be uploaded on Sunday. I'm really, really psyched, and I hope you guys are psyched, and I'm ready to have a fantastic season. So, like I said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.